There comes a moment in every life when the walls around us start to close in, when fear becomes louder than our dreams, and when the pain inside us begins to overshadow our will to rise. I have been in that moment. I have seen what it means to fall, not once, but again and again in life, in spirit, and in hope. And yet I am standing here today not because I was fearless, but because I chose to be courageous. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what breathes life into you when everything else is falling apart. Courage is not about having a perfect life, it's about accepting the imperfections and still moving forward with grace, with purpose, and with resilience. It's about showing up for yourself, even when the world stops showing up for you. Today, I want to take you on a journey not of victories, but of wounds turned into wisdom. I want to speak about the power that lies dormant in all of us, the power to rise, to fight, to rebuild. The power of courage, and I hope by the end of this talk you'll realize that the same strength that carried me through my darkest hours lives in you too. Courage begins in silence. It doesn't arrive with noise or applause. It doesn't come dressed in strength or confidence. It arrives quietly, often in moments when you feel completely broken, completely lost. I remember lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, my spine fractured, my dreams shattered, and my future uncertain. In that moment, I did not feel brave. I did not feel strong. I felt helpless, angry, and afraid, and yet something began to rise within me, not a roar, but a whisper that said, "This is not how your story ends." We often think courage is something grand, something seen only in extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. But real courage, the kind that truly changes your life, starts with choosing to face the truth of where you are. For me, courage began with accepting that my body would never be the same. It began with looking in the mirror and seeing a reflection I didn't recognize, and still deciding to love her. It began when I stopped asking why me, and started asking what now. Pain has a strange way of awakening us. It strips away everything superficial and forces us to meet ourselves. And when you meet yourself in that raw, vulnerable state, you realize that courage is not something you wait for. It is something you create. You create it every time you decide to breathe through the pain. You create it every time you speak your truth, even if your voice trembles. You create it when you decide to keep living, even when your life doesn't look the way you imagined. There is a kind of power in accepting your reality, not with defeat, but with dignity. The moment I stopped fighting my circumstances and started embracing them, something inside me shifted. I began to understand that courage is not about changing what has happened to you. It is about changing what you do with what has happened. It is about transforming your wounds into wisdom, your sorrow into strength, and your silence into a voice. Sometimes we wait for the perfect moment to be brave. We think, when I'm healed, when I'm ready, when I'm stronger, then I'll step forward. But the truth is, courage doesn't wait for you to be ready. Courage meets you in your weakness, and walks with you through it. It doesn't demand perfection, it only asks for presence. And sometimes just being present, just choosing to get up, to speak up, to show up, that is the bravest thing you can do. I've met so many people who think they are weak because they cry, because they break down, because they feel deeply, but I believe that vulnerability is the birthplace of real courage. It takes immense strength to be honest about your pain, to say I am not okay, and to still keep going. There is nothing weak about that. That is raw courage, that is power. There were days I didn't want to get out of bed, days when the physical pain was unbearable and the emotional pain was even worse. And yet, even on those days, I found one small reason to keep going. Sometimes it was the smile of a nurse. Sometimes it was memory. Sometimes it was just the stubborn hope that there had to be more to life than suffering. Those small moments were my stepping stones, and every time I chose to honor those moments instead of drowning in despair, I was choosing courage. We are all afraid of something, afraid of failure, rejection, loss, judgment, uncertainty. But courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision that something else matters more. For me, the desire to live a meaningful life mattered more. The desire to inspire others, to use my voice, to paint again, to smile again, to give hope again, that mattered more than fear. Courage is not a destination. It is not something you arrive at once and for all. It is a choice you make every single day, and some days it's not about climbing mountains. Some days it's just about putting one foot in front of the other. It's about continuing to believe in the possibility of light, even when you're surrounded by darkness. It's about trusting that no matter how broken you feel, there is still something unbreakable within you. Something that no accident, no heartbreak, no loss can ever destroy. The most beautiful and courageous thing a human being can do is to allow themselves to be seen. Not just the polished parts, not just the achievements, but the broken pieces, the scars, the unspoken stories. We live in a world that constantly tells us to hide our pain, to wear a smile even when our hearts are heavy, to keep moving even when we can barely stand. But I believe there is immense strength in vulnerability. When you show the world who you truly are in all your imperfection, you are not weak. You are powerful beyond measure. There is a kind of courage that doesn't get celebrated enough, the kind that isn't loud or visible, the kind that happens in the quiet moments when no one is watching, the courage to forgive yourself for the things you didn't know, for the mistakes you made when you were just trying to survive, the courage to admit that you're struggling, to ask for help, to say, I am not okay. That kind of honesty takes more bravery than any battlefield. I remember the days when I felt like a burden, when I looked at myself and thought, who will ever understand this pain? But then I realized that in this very pain lies my purpose. In every crack there is a story. In every wound there is wisdom. And if I choose to share it, to open my heart even when it trembles, maybe someone else will feel a little less alone. Maybe they'll find the strength to keep going, because they saw someone else rise through the fire. We are taught to chase strength, but true strength is not about having it all together. It's about continuing to rise when everything in you wants to give up. It's about walking through life with a heart that has been broken, yet still chooses love. It's about holding space for both your grief and your gratitude. It's about showing up with your whole self even when that self feels messy or unsure. There were moments I thought my life was over, not just because of the accident, but because of what it took away from me, my independence, my identity, my dreams. But in those moments I discovered something deeper. I discovered that identity is not about what we lose or what we do. It is about who we are in the stillness, who we are when no one is clapping, who we are when everything else is stripped away. And in that quiet space, I met a version of myself I never knew existed. Woman who could still give, still love, still rise. I learned that courage often means surrendering the illusion of control. It means letting go of the perfect plan and trusting that life still has meaning, even when it looks nothing like what you expected. It means embracing uncertainty, knowing that not having all the answers doesn't make you less worthy, it makes you human. And in that humanity, in that imperfection, we find connection. We find compassion. We find a deeper purpose. People often ask me how I stayed strong, how I kept smiling through everything. The truth is, I didn't always feel strong, but I made a decision not to let bitterness define me, not to let pain consume me. I chose to believe that my story still mattered, that my voice could still make a difference, that even if my path was different from what I imagined, it could still be beautiful in its own way. The world tells us to hide our flaws, to mask our fears, to only show the highlight reel. But real connection happens in the shadows, in the moments when you say, me too. In the silence between the words, when two people recognize the same kind of ache in each other's eyes. That is where healing begins. That is where courage lives. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply begin again, to rise after falling, to open your heart after heartbreak, to trust again, to dream again, to live again, not because it's easy, but because somewhere deep within you there is still a flicker of light, a flicker that refuses to go out, no matter how many storms you face. That flicker is your courage, that flicker is your strength. There are moments in life that change everything in the blink of an eye. Moments that divide your life into before and after. We don't choose them and we don't see them coming, but they come anyway, loud, uninvited, and unapologetic. In those moments, the world doesn't pause. Life doesn't ask you if you're ready. It just happens, and all you are left with is the choice of what you do next. That is where courage begins to unfold, not in the moment of impact, but in the aftermath, in the silence, in the stillness, in the decision to rebuild when everything feels ruined. When my life changed, I felt like I was standing in the ruins of everything I once knew. The dreams I had carefully built were suddenly out of reach. The plans I had made vanished in an instant, and the life I once lived became a memory I could no longer return to. I won't lie and say it was easy to accept. There were days I felt like I was grieving someone who still had a heartbeat, myself. The version of me that once ran, danced, moved freely, lived without fear. But courage isn't about erasing grief. It's about learning to live alongside it, to allow yourself to feel the pain, to honor it, and still decide to keep going. People see the final version of your strength and assume it came effortlessly. But what they don't see are the countless days you spent picking up your own pieces. They don't see the moments when you had to convince yourself that you still had purpose. They don't see the internal battle, the quiet prayers, the tears you wiped away before anyone noticed. But that's where the real power lies, in those hidden victories, in those private moments of resilience, in the way you carry yourself forward when you have every reason to stop. Sometimes courage is choosing to stay soft in a world that hardens people, to keep your heart open after it has been broken, to let yourself be seen when you'd rather disappear. It's about showing up not as who you think you should be, but as who you truly are. We are all taught to present the strongest version of ourselves, to be polished, composed, unshaken. But I believe the world needs more people who are real. People who can say, "This is where I've been, and this is how I've grown, and this is what I'm still learning." There is strength in that kind of honesty. I've often been asked how I find the motivation to keep smiling, to keep painting, to keep inspiring others. The answer is simple, but it's not easy. I remind myself of what still remains, of what still matters. I may have lost the ability to walk, but I have not lost the ability to dream. I may have experienced pain, but I have not lost the capacity to love. My voice, my thoughts, my heart, these are not paralyzed, and if I can use them to touch even one soul, then I have a reason to keep going. Every scar tells a story. Some are visible, etched onto our bodies as reminders of the battles we've fought. Others are hidden deep within us, tucked behind brave smiles and steady voices. But all of them are proof that we have survived something, that we have endured, adapted, grown. And when we share those stories, we remind others that they are not alone, that even in brokenness there is beauty, that even in pain there is purpose. I believe that courage also means redefining success. For some, it might be a standing ovation or a gold medal. For me, it was learning to sit up again. It was holding a paintbrush in hands that trembled. It was learning to laugh at my own struggles, to find lightness in heavy moments. Success is not measured by how far you've come compared to others. It's measured by how far you've come from where you started. And sometimes getting out of bed, speaking your truth, or simply breathing through the weight of the day. That is more than enough. It is easy to admire someone's strength once they've overcome. But what we often forget is that strength is built in the small, invisible steps. In the mornings when you rise even with tears in your eyes, in the nights when you whisper to yourself that you will try again tomorrow. That is courage. That is how we begin again, not because we are unafraid, but because we know that fear does not define us. What defines us is how we choose to rise again and again. Against all odds, there is a quiet kind of courage that goes unnoticed. It doesn't shine under a spotlight or receive thunderous applause. It doesn't wear medals or make headlines. This kind of courage lives in everyday moments. In the mother who wakes up to care for her children while silently battling depression, in the student who continues to study despite constant self-doubt, in the man who smiles through grief just to make those around him feel at ease. It lives in the people who choose to rise, even when the weight of life tries to keep them down. Sometimes the hardest part of being courageous is showing up for yourself. We often go through life wearing masks, pretending to be okay, carrying pain we don't speak about, fears we don't share, dreams we've buried. But real courage is not pretending. Real courage is being true to who you are, even if the world doesn't understand it. It's honoring your feelings even when others tell you to stay strong, as if strength means being numb. Courage is not being untouched by life. Courage is being deeply touched by it and still choosing to live with an open heart. I have learned that healing is not a destination. It is not something that arrives all at once. It is a slow, deeply personal journey, and it takes immense courage to walk that path. It takes courage to confront the parts of yourself you've avoided, to sit in silence and face your thoughts without judgment, to forgive the people who hurt you, and sometimes to forgive yourself for the times you hurt others while you were hurting. Healing demands honesty. It demands gentleness, and above all, it demands the courage to begin, even if you don't know where it will lead. In our darkest moments, we often ask, "Why me?" It's a question born from pain, confusion, and a desperate need to understand. I've asked it too. I've looked at my reflection and wondered what I did to deserve a life so altered, a body so broken. But over time, I began to realize that asking why me kept me tied to the past, to the loss, to the things I could not change. So I changed the question. I began asking, what now? And how can I turn this pain into purpose? That shift required courage. It required letting go of the life I thought I was supposed to live and embracing the one I had. It meant writing a new story, one that was not defined by tragedy but transformed by resilience. We spend so much time trying to fit into other people's expectations. We strive for acceptance, for validation, for praise. But true courage is found when you stop asking for permission to be yourself, when you no longer shrink to make others comfortable, when you realize that your worth is not tied to your productivity, your appearance, or your past. You are worthy simply because you exist. And when you embrace that truth, you begin to live not just for survival, but for meaning. That is the moment you begin to truly live. There were days I feared that my limitations would define me, that I would always be seen through the lens of what I had lost. But then I discovered something powerful. Limitations are not the end of potential. They are the beginning of creativity. When one door closes, another doesn't always open immediately. Sometimes you have to build a new door. Sometimes you have to become the architect of your own path, and that takes courage, the kind of courage that doesn't look for shortcuts or guarantees, the kind of courage that says, "I will try anyway." Every person has a fire within them. For some, it burns brightly. For others, it flickers faintly beneath the weight of fear, trauma, and failure. But it's there. It never fully goes out. It waits patiently to be reignited. Courage is the match. It's the decision to believe in that spark again, to believe that you are not your past, not your scars, not your fears. You are a canvas still being painted, a story still being written, a masterpiece still in progress. What I know now is that courage is contagious. When you choose to rise, you silently give permission to others to do the same. When you speak your truth, you create space for others to find their voice. When you live authentically, you inspire others to do the same, not by force, but by example. That is the ripple effect of courage. It starts within you, but it never ends there. It moves outward, touching lives, shifting perspectives, reminding the world that hope is not naive. It is necessary, and it is courage that keeps it alive. So if there is one thing I want you to carry with you after hearing these words, it is this: courage doesn't live in the extraordinary. It lives in the ordinary. It lives in your quiet decisions, your silent battles, your willingness to begin again when everything inside you wants to give up. Courage is not a destination you arrive at when everything is perfect. It is a choice you make in the middle of the storm, in the midst of uncertainty, in the depth of your pain. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be unbreakable. You just need to take one brave breath, one honest step, one moment of belief in yourself. You have already survived so much, and that means you already carry within you the power to survive and thrive through so much more. Your scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof that you fought, that you endured, that you rose, and the world needs your story, not when it's perfect, but exactly as it is. Your truth has power, your journey has meaning, and your courage, no matter how quiet or unseen, is what makes you unstoppable. So rise, not when the world says you're ready, but when your soul whispers it's time. Rise for the person you are becoming. Rise for the ones who are still finding their way. Rise not because life is easy, but because you are stronger than you know, because the power of courage is already within you, and it always has been.